What's up, founders, and welcome to the In Demand podcast, where we talk all about how to troubleshoot growth for your PLG SaaS. I'm your co-host, Asia Arangio, the CEO and founder of DemandMaven.
And I'm Kim Talarczyk, Client Services Manager at DemandMaven, where we help SaaS companies reach their toughest growth milestones.
All right, Kim, let's get into it. All right, welcome back to a new season of In Demand. We're going to try something new this year. And what we're going to try is we're going to try having not just any guest, but we'll say a co-host. And this co-host is someone that I've known for years now. How long has it been?
Almost four?
Almost 4 years. Oh my gosh.
I think so.
We're going to try having a co-host. So traditionally speaking, like if you've been listening to this podcast, which I keep hearing from many of you that you absolutely do listen, and you've in some cases listened to every episode. If you've been listening to In Demand for any amount of time, you know that historically speaking, it's primarily just been me by myself hosting the podcast. But what we've learned over the years is it's actually really hard for me to sustain by myself for no other reason than when it's just me by myself, it's actually really hard to be consistent and motivated to keep doing it. But what inevitably ends up happening is I end up going to a conference, like let's say MicroConf, or I go to a retreat like Indie Founders, which we'll probably talk about today. And someone will say, Asia, I've listened to every single one of your episodes. When is the next season coming out? And basically I'm like, oh my gosh. And then that's when I remember I have a podcast that I should, publish on and, share my knowledge and, whatever wisdom I have with the world. And that's exactly what happened to me recently. And so finally we put our brains together and we were like, how do we make this something consistent? There's also a little bit of, I got diagnosed with ADHD last year. That's also part of the story. And one of the things that is true for me is when I have someone who's like physically with me, when I'm body doubling basically in any scenario, or there's a very real breathing audience with me in some kind of way, that's when I deliver. So that's why speaking is one of my favorite things that I do. I'm giving this preamble because this context is important because I've been working with Kim Talarczyk. That's how you say it. That's how you say your last name?
It actually is. You're one of the few that can say it.
I actually had a moment where I was like, wait, is it Chick? And then, okay, Kim Talarczyk. I've been working with Kim now for 4 years. She's been my right-hand woman for the last, for some time now. And she's seen so many iterations of DemandMaven. She's seen very many iterations of me. And we couldn't think of a better person to bring on and also to help probe and extract some of these learnings, insights, all the things when it comes to not just growing and really operating within DemandMaven, but also the work that we do for founders all over the world. We've worked with over 100 SaaS founders now, and there's just so much knowledge to share. And with all of that context and preamble, I would love to pass it to Kim. Kim, welcome to the podcast as co-host to tell the world about you. And we just love to hear from you just a little bit about your background and what you've been doing at DemandMaven.
Yeah, thanks, Asia. So I'm happy to be here. I've been an in-demand listener, been involved with DemandMaven, like you said, for almost 4 years now. So this is a cool opportunity. I think this will be fun. So at DemandMaven, I do client services. I do operations work. So I help make sure our client work, is packaged well and on time and run smoothly. I help with operational things on the DemandMaven business side. And my background really is just that. I've worked in mostly, I would say, marketing and tech agencies, both on the operational side. So, whether it's scaling, building teams, growing kind of the business and doing the operations side of the business and all the process stuff, and then also the client-facing stuff. So account management, project management. I've worked with big clients, small clients, B2B, B2C. Yeah, so the work at DemandMaven largely is, very similar and just, has been very seamless to be coming in and working in the various ways we've been working with a variety of clients. But so looking forward to kind of being the operational side in this podcast to, your strategic side and help in that way kind of pull out these gems that I hear from you every day, every week. And we can, can be the place where we can kind of distill it and share it, because I think there's a lot to share with others.
Totally. And it's so funny because we genuinely have discussions all the time. You know, our clients are kind of like our children in a way. We're like, we talk about like, what do they really need? And how do we present it in a way that they're going to understand? And then also, what are some of the paths that, you know, they could go down that maybe aren't the best paths? And how do we make sure that we mitigate risk as much as possible? And we have genuinely, I feel like we've hashed it out for years on a number of topics, things that we could absolutely share with the world. And obviously with respect to everyone that we work with, of course. But yeah, absolutely. And I joke that Kim is kind of like my boss, actually. Like, she's like also keeping me organized. We position her as client services manager to our clients, but really she's also making sure that I'm not over promising and under delivering, because that is one of my biggest pet peeves with consultants and agencies is they promise this very big world. And sometimes even like in meetings or in passing, they'll promise deliverables, or they'll promise things, and then they either don't remember, or they just, you know, they low key forget about it and then don't actually end up delivering. So Kim is also really kind of like my boss in a way. And I do not like, I wouldn't have kept running DemandMaven if it hadn't have been for her. So in so many ways, I'm super grateful generally for your presence, Kim, but also that you're joining me on the pod.
Awesome. Thanks.
So last week, okay, so for context, the last couple of weeks I've been traveling. Went to MicroConf in New Orleans, which was a blast. And then right after that, went to Indie Founders. And that is it's an exclusive founder retreat that's hosted by Rand Fishkin, whom you may know previously from Moz, but is now running Snack Bar Studio and also Spark Toro. And he's always working on things. Like, Rand is just like always, I feel like he's always exploring stuff. And then it's also co-hosted by Paldi Giulizzoni from Balsamic. And Paldi has this beautiful office in Bologna, which is where he's from. And almost every year, not every single year, but almost every year, they will host us for like a founder retreat. It is relatively exclusive, invitation only. But the whole premise is that we're bringing together founders who aren't interested in building unicorns. We're far more interested in building zebras. And so the Indie Founder logo, for example, is a zebra. And a zebra is like, this is a unique, beautiful creature, but it's real and it's practical and it exists. It's not this, you know, like the unicorn, or now even like the decacorn, which is what VCs are talking about now. But anyway, I digress. So the whole premise
I have not heard that one.
Yeah, decacorn is, I remember reading an article about it and I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit because I was just like, there's always something bigger and to aspire towards. And I think it is both a blessing and curse. It's like unicorn was already hard. Now if it doesn't make at least $1 billion, like, we don't care, which is crazy. But anyway, all that to say though, so that's the whole premise of Indie Founders. And I have been very fortunate enough to get invited every year. And it's like 20 to 30 founders and CEOs, and we are all under this umbrella of Indie Founder, and we are all also the content is really like an unconference where we don't have speakers necessarily. It's all workshops and like troubleshooting sessions. And I will say it is also, culturally speaking, very vulnerable, very transparent. There's not a whole lot of space for hyperbolic ego or anything that is like just not grounded in, I think, saliency or reality, or even just like humanism. Like, this is not the hustle culture type of retreat. This is the let's be real and practical, but also be human about it, because like, we're humans and we have human needs, and we're all also very much in different phases and stages in life. Some of us are entering into like matriarch and patriarch stage, nearing retirement, but not exactly quite retirement. And some of us are extremely early in our careers, and then some of us are right in the middle. And so we're all dealing with different energy levels as well. It's really interesting. it's part of,
That's awesome.
Yeah, like it's like I encourage founders to find some version of this if they can. Although to be fair, it is kind of challenging to do, but there are absolutely micro communities like this that exist to support founders. And I feel very fortunate to have found this one.
Yeah, the thing that struck me there is the zebra comment, right? So like that's already a little bit self-selecting. I mean, you hear, so people aren't going there thinking like I'm building the next unicorn. It's real. So that's very cool.
Yeah.
And so when you do that, what do you bring back to your work at DemandMaven?
Yeah.
Coming back from something like that.
When it comes to things like that, so I've kind of accepted that over the years, I have accepted that DemandMaven probably isn't the business that scales in any type of way that is meaningful without fundamentally changing something about the business. Like I would either need to find a co-founder or if I really wanted to scale this thing out. But I think the reality is it's probably not that. It's probably far more about how do I continue to evolve my practice? How do I continue to grow and to learn from others? And how do I really continue to ensure that I am supported by this business in the best way that it can? And if other opportunities pop up, great. But for the most part, I hate to say DemandMaven is like a lifestyle business, but it kind of low key is. It's such a bad, like a dirty word in our world to have a lifestyle business. But that is kind of what it is.
Right. And I guess you could look at that in a couple ways. But it sounds like going to a retreat like that grounds you.
Yes.
In a practical way. So, I think lifestyle can be taken as, well, just make enough money to just do fun things that you want.
Right.
Which maybe is the bad connotation of it. But it also feels to me like don't overspend. Don't go borrow money just for the sake of borrowing money. I think what you're saying it means is like doing good work, but not at the expense of, well, now we need to make this much profit to maintain or pay back this money. You're doing it for the work and making money from that to support things, but not in an outlandish way or to hit some sort of milestone just to hit the milestone.
Totally. And I think I spent a lot of years trying to convince myself that that's what I wanted to do. But the more that I think about it, and also the more that time just passed, I kind of realized like, actually, that isn't necessarily what I want to do for myself, unless that's just what ended up happening. I think it's far more about these are the problems that I love to solve. How do I just ensure that I am always employed, that I am always solving those problems for people? Mm-hmm. And I take away, well, one, the camaraderie for sure. Travel does something to my brain that I always underestimate and forget about until I'm doing it. And I'm actually like in a different, even going to New Orleans, which is like a 6-hour drive from here, or like a 1.5-hour flight, like even something as near as that is still fundamentally changing. Like it shifts my energy in a way that I genuinely forget about it. And every time I do it, I'm always like, I should travel more.
You got to get out. You have to connect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like your brain rewires a little bit, I feel like, every time. And for me, going to a different city to hang out with other CEOs and founders is like, it is so energizing. Draining but it's draining in a different way. It's draining more like physically, like it's just a lot. It's a lot of talking and a lot of sharing, and being vulnerable that much all the time is a lot. But it is also, I feel like I get glimmers of the future every time I do something like this. If that makes any sense. It's like almost prophetic. Like, for example, my big download this time was, like I should be really thinking about my future as like an interim CEO, actually. Which was, so
interesting.
Yeah.
CEO over CMO over COO.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because we were talking about COO too, but I was getting feedback from other CEOs and founders. And as you know, we've been doing the fractional CMO as a service.
Yeah.
And we're like a month into that. And I've been loving it. I've genuinely been loving it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is actually something that like I wasn't sure if I would be good at this,
Well, I knew you would be, but that's okay. It took you some time.
It took me some time, yeah. But I really didn't know if I would like it. And I think that that's really the like, obviously that has to be true too if I'm going to keep doing it. But so far I've been like, oh man, like I actually enjoy this work. But I also know myself well enough to know that chief marketing officer is still a box in a way. And
yeah,
I do believe that, not that I'll outgrow it, but I do think like I'm going to want to stretch. And
yeah. And there's so much work that you do with other clients that's running the gamut, troubleshooting growth across. I mean, you're dealing with product, having to deal with the operations department, other departments. We're at a more CEO level. So yeah, for sure. The work you do in general isn't largely boxed in just marketing.
Right, exactly. And so that really brought me to interim CEO, and I talked with a lot of other CEOs and founders about it. And it was just so interesting to get their perspective. Everyone that I talk to doesn't like the job of CEO.
Really? Now, are you talking to CEOs or people that are being managed by CEOs or working beside them?
True CEOs, but who are also the founders. And
okay, yeah.
They made it very clear, though, that their perspective is because they were the founder. And they had to grow and stretch into a CEO, but that's not naturally who they are. They are makers and very passionate makers. It's so funny because that is actually the total opposite of how I feel. And so,
wait, what do you mean?
Well, in that, like, I just don't see myself as a maker. I don't see myself as a maker at all. Clearly, I don't. I struggle with like podcasts, but
isn't that what would make you the good CEO?
I think so.
Is that what people are saying?
And yeah, and that was the discussion that I had with several other CEOs. Is they were like, "You'll probably make a great one because you're not the founder and you don't see yourself as like, like you've got to go and make stuff." And it's like,
well,
yeah,
it's why. I mean, I've worked with you, working with so many founders now, and it's probably why you've done such great work with the founders, because you're helping a little bit with that CEO level stuff sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
As they're starting to grow and, hiring more people.
Yeah. And I never, it's funny because like hearing you say it, I'm like, oh yeah, that is true. But I never think of it that way in the moment. It's always after I'm like, that kind of was CEO work. So my big takeaways were like, for the first time ever, I had a glimmer of like, a career path of this could be something that I actually commit myself to. And it was interesting though, hearing feedback of like, well, why interim CEO? And I said, well, I don't know if I'm going to I could hate it. Like it's possible. Interim seems like a good way to get the experience. Now, it's like interim is usually like long-term. It's usually like 1 to 2 years at least. But I could see something like that for myself in the future. And then, like I don't have a boss technically. So talking to all these other CEOs and founders who are in different spaces and iterations of their careers than me, it's always just so fulfilling just to see like, oh, there is more, and not necessarily bigger. There's just different. Like we could quit it all and go start a farm if we wanted. You know what I mean? And there are people there who have done that. And so it's like, it's just really cool to hear so many different experiences. And because again, we're not out to create unicorns, we're out to create, like, we're zebras, and we want to create
businesses.
Right. We're profitable, sustainable, and hopefully happy. There's a little bit of whimsy to a zebra. And I think like that mindset is just so interesting, but I think it's important to have because not everyone wants to do like, the big scaled out thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to the advice you were getting or what people are telling you. So if they're saying that CEO is no one wants to do that or they don't want to do that, why? Like, what does a good CEO do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the part that most people don't like. So if you're the founder and you really identify as a maker, what you probably don't like to do is the people side of things. So managing, it probably feels good to some extent to lead, but to manage is very different. So talking about like your career path, your goals, and also if you're meeting them or not. If you are helping shape that person in either the way that you need or the way that they desire or some mixture of both. And then there's doing that at scale. And also at the executive level, it gets interesting because you have to be someone who's able to host that type of energy, which if you're a founder who's never hired a true exec before, this won't make any sense. But yet, at least, until you do. But when you hire like a true VP or a true chief, it is a different energy that you're hosting. You're hosting someone who is probably a go-getter. They're probably very high achieving, very aspirational. They're also probably strategic to some extent. And you almost have to match them where they're at. And that can be either uncomfortable or draining as hell, depending on who you are, just as a person. And that's not exciting for some people. And I totally get that. And then there's also just the amount of decision making that happens can be really draining for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I have heard in past roles people say like that true CEO role as you grow becomes boring to a lot of people because if you're the founder, that's not what you started doing. It's just a whole different skill set and mindset that's happening there.
Exactly. I heard that too. And I can see that. I can absolutely see that. I can see where if you're the founder and you're becoming a CEO or in the process of, and I think I have an episode on this exact topic, like from back in the day, but I can totally see how that would be. Like once you figure it out, it's like, this is an algorithm that I run now and it produces an output and it's boring. Yeah, totally.
Right. And there's certain things that need to be paid attention to and monitored and what a inhibitor to growth then and we've kind of seen it too happen, companies kind of growing along fine. I mean, if you need that true CEO role and you don't have it, then that's going to affect your growth, right? There's just certain things that need to be done at that level, hiring, managing, setting KPIs, making sure certain things are met. That if that's not happening.
Setting strategy, setting vision.
And then, of course, right, not even to mention the strategy or the vision,
I know,
which is obviously key.
Yeah. Yeah, but all that, so it's funny, like we're talking about this and I'm like, oh, that sounds actually like fun for me.
What you've done before, really.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Just at a much smaller scale, but yes.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe that's actually not true either, because I was a board member of Moz, and that is, that's one of the highest positions you can hold in an organization. So I guess to be fair, I think I wish I was just around for longer for that experience.
Yeah, the exit, but they exited, right?
Right. It's funny,
which was good.
I talk, so for listeners, for context, I don't talk about this a ton, but Rand Fishkin, so when he stepped down from the board at Moz, he tapped me to take his seat. So I was an official acting board member. I wasn't just a watcher. A lot of people ask me that. They're like, oh, so did you just observe? And I was like, no, I was a voting member. Like I had to sign in like so much paperwork. Like I didn't realize what board governance was until joining a board. I was an acting member, but I was only an acting member for 6 months before we exited. And I say only. 6 months is not a short time, but it does feel short in the context of board work. But Rand and I talk about this all the time because he's like, man, it felt like it was longer. And I was like, it wasn't. It was really only from like October to June. And he, like, every time we talk about it, his mind is always blown because it doesn't feel that like, but he has a different context, right? So he's thinking Moz like in its entirety. And I was only really a part of the story for a very short amount of time at the end. So to him, time looks different, but it just is really, it's funny. Like it really wasn't that long. But to be fair, I did have that experience too. So I did actually see a different side of size and scale One of the things that came out of, like when I think about the themes and the topics, so like what do we talk about when we're at a conference or like an unconference like this or like a retreat? And I'm sworn to secrecy in terms of specifics of like, what did people share? But I can give you general high level, like this is generally what we may cover. So things like, what are the right channels to be thinking about investing in? Another very, very popular topic was founder therapy, which was come to founder therapy, and it doesn't matter what it is. It could be about anything, but what is like the pressing thing for you in life or in work or whatever that you'd like to get off your chest? And founder therapy always blows my mind because of the types of things that people share. It's never just work. And I think like sometimes it is work, but it's not only ever just work. People will share very intimate details about what's going on in their lives. And it's such a good reminder of just, again, how human we all are and how we all have different shit. Like we just do. And we are all also aspirational achievers who want to keep our businesses and keep them running and keep them going. And it's just interesting, like the things that come up. And another really popular topic was, so there were industry shifts. Like, what are the things happening in the industry that's causing us to think about like how to adjust our businesses or change our businesses? I didn't go to that one, but I wanted to. And then, there was another one that was really popular that I'm going to forget. Oh, product. So we ended up talking a lot about product. We've got a lot of, there are businesses that are, because we are experiencing a paradigm shift in tech, and this happens every time there's a paradigm shift in tech, but a lot of us are thinking about either how to reposition or how to pivot or how to set a product vision, and that's coming up. So it was interesting to hear everyone's experiences of this. Yeah, product management also came up quite a bit, and like product discovery. That was pretty cool too.
Yeah, no, I mean, all those topics really, I mean, are so applicable to the work that we do and the people that we work with. You know, like just one, it's so cool that you get to be away in Italy to do that, but you're coming back with a lot of useful, applicable. I mean, we hear clients talking about this stuff, right? And AI and just industry shifts and channels, what should be looked at or what's not worth it right now, of course, varies by the business. But yeah, I mean, I think that's really cool that you are not sitting in a vacuum in a box on your, going out and doing these things and coming back makes DemandMaven much stronger.
Totally.
It makes you much stronger too.
Totally. I think the thing that I've been thinking about the most, though, I mean, obviously it's the industry shifts. Like no one can predict the future.
Right.
And I think someone, I can't remember who said this to me. I can't remember who said this to me, but I remember lamenting not really having like a 3 or 5 year plan for DemandMaven. I used to make them. But once I kind of realized like, maybe I'm actually not playing a finite game. Maybe I'm playing an infinite game. And so the game for me is actually constant iteration and constant exploration of new things. And then figuring out how I can get paid to do them for people. And so maybe like it's okay to not have a 3 to 5 year plan. But someone said to me, Asia, who can plan in 2025? I laughed so hard because I was like, oh yeah, that is so true. But when you lead a company, and DemandMaven is super small in comparison to some of these other companies, but when you like lead and run and manage a team, you still have to have something on paper. And even when I think about the fractional CMO work that I'm doing, like we still have to have something on paper, even though we can't predict the future. And so I've been thinking a lot about it's the, like what you might learn in business school. I wouldn't know. I didn't go to business school. I went to art school actually. But what you might learn in business school is like, hedge your bets and have like, there's strategy A, but there should also possibly be strategy B and strategy C in case strategy A very clearly doesn't pan out. And this is where we get into like corporate strategy where, they're spending bukus of money on getting data points and blah, blah, blah. So like what do founders of bootstrap companies do instead? And I've been thinking a lot about like, what is that? You know what I mean? Like, what is the version of that that's palatable? And
yes,
possible.
And what is it? Did people talk about that at all?
Not a ton that I was at least a part of. I did talk to a CEO who is in the process now of communicating product vision to their VP of product. And I remember part of the challenge was we can't predict the future. It's super volatile. And I don't know that there was really a time where tech was super predictable, but with AI coming into play, we really don't know where anything is going to go.
Hmm.
And I remember asking that CEO, well, are there leading indicators in the market that would indicate that the market's headed in a particular way? And so, for example, so-and-so, leading corporate company acquires some other company that might signal something. Like that's typically what we see. We see acquisitions are a very common flag. There are others like certain companies or agencies sprouting up, certain roles changing. Like for example, product manager, like the role of product manager is changing. And like we're seeing that shift. We're also seeing companies maybe not hire them at the same rate that they used to, which is really interesting. Same thing for engineers and developers. And so sorry, go ahead.
No, that's just interesting. I almost would feel like it would be the opposite.
I know. Yeah, I know. Like nothing in tech ever makes sense at first. And then someone does a study 5 years later and is like, yeah, I remember back in 2025 when this was happening. Well, this is why. And it's like, oh.
Right.
But I was kind of like, well, what are the leading indicators for like, and you do have to like, I guess, pontificate, if that's the right word. Like you do kind of have to imagine, well, what would have to be true in order for us to know if we should head in a direction or not. And there were a couple of things that he could think of, but then he, the CEO was like, yeah, like that's actually a really good question. Like we should probably, I mean, I don't know if they'll, use that as an exercise or not, but I was giving an example and it's a terrible example that I probably won't share on the podcast, but it was an example nonetheless. But yeah, I was kind of thinking like maybe it's that version. Like maybe there's some version, like there has to be some process that founders of bootstrap companies can leverage or use that helps them really identify and understand what is their plan. I mean, what is plan A, but also like what's plan B if these other things end up being true. And some things you can't conceive of and there's nothing you can do about that. But some things you kind of can. Like if I'm thinking about some of our clients in the education space, the thing that I would be looking very closely at would just be how the current administration treats certain education programs. And also I'd be looking for like, are my customers' titles changing or are their roles changing or are we seeing lots of turnover? Like there are signals.
Right. Yes. So it's good to document and know those signals. So it's really just collecting data at that point, right?
Right. And I think a really strong leader will be paying attention. It's when we stop paying attention that like we're surprised by things later. So, but again, it's so hard to tell. It's really, really tough to tell. And also there's no shame if you miss stuff. I remember when, I don't know if you remember this, but when Silicon Valley Bank failed, which I'm putting that in finger quotes because it's still like my card still works. Like they're still around.
It got saved.
Right. But when it failed, I remember I just remember for like the quarter after that was abysmal for sales. Like everyone was afraid. People were like, is this it? Is the fabric of tech going to just fall apart? And it didn't. It was mostly fine. VC funding did slow down a lot, but we like that was a bubble that I feel like a lot of us already knew about anyway. So it wasn't super surprising, but it did scare a lot of people. But that to me was a sign of like, it was a sign of the times. Like, okay, this happened. Founders are going to be scared. Like this is a signal and I have to adjust if I want to survive.
Right.
That was a really tough year. Was that last year?
I think it was 2023, wasn't it?
That sounds right. But it is wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. The years blur.
They do. I can't believe it's already 2025.
I know. I can't either. Like any second it's going to be 2030. Whole new decade. Okay, I just want to tell this like one like really quick story that I thought was kind of cute. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about though. I just want to share it because it's cute. Okay, so on most airlines, but especially Delta, which we're a Delta family. I live in Atlanta. It's the Delta hub. It's where like it all started, right? So we take Delta everywhere. And when you take any of its associated airlines, which I think KLM is one, and then Air France, and then LATAM, I think, is another one. Am I remembering that correctly? Anyway, so you take like a Delta flight or an Air France flight to Paris, and they always like the buckle up your seatbelt and here's where the exits are. It's always correlated to the culture in some kind of way. So the French one was so cute. If you take like British Airways or if you take a Delta flight to like Heathrow, it's always like very British themed. It's adorable. The American one. So when we took the flight from Paris to Atlanta, coming back home from Indie Founders, the American one is like, it's every decade starting, I want to say from the 1900s, because it's like Delta's 100-year anniversary.
Okay.
Which I should Google this. Like, how many 100-year companies are there, like, that are Fortune 500 or even 100? But I was like, man, 100 years for Delta? That's and I'm imagining, like, if I had to bet, this is totally a sidebar, but if I had to bet, I think either it's going to be HubSpot or Salesforce that's like the 100-year company or whatever. But anyway, so Delta, the American one is like, oh, you're coming to America, but they did like decades of fashion. So it was like, this is what the Delta uniform looked like in 2020 or 1920, for example. And then they did like the 20s, the 30s, 40s, all the way up to the 2010s. They didn't do 2020s, probably because the decade hasn't finished. So we don't have like a clear like style, I guess, yet. But they they nailed everything. They botched the 90s entirely. It was really,
what do you mean?
It was really 2000. So like for each decade, I should see if like this is published somewhere on YouTube. But like for each decade, they're showing like passengers, but like in the style. So like the 70s, everyone's got froze.
Oh,
like,
okay, yeah.
Yeah. And like in the 60s, everyone is wearing, it looks like it's all Christian Dior. Like it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And so just timeless looking. Well, the 90s, I was expecting like 90s grunge. Like, oh, they're going to do like plaid and like spiked frosted tips and just like, like the way that like, what we looked
maybe
in the 90s.
Some baggy pants, cargo,
right.
I don't know.
Jeans co, and then like, you remember like the chains that people used to wear like on
Oh yeah.
Like, yeah.
Jenko jeans and yeah.
Yeah, I was expecting that and it was not that. They gave us instead, it did look like a boy band, but they had these like silver sunglasses, like the ones that's in every like early 2000s music video that you've ever seen. So they botched the 90s. And then for the 2010s, they tried to make it look like almost ska. For the 2000s, they made it look almost ska, like Amy Winehouse, like that.
Okay,
those super thick heels with like the, I know what I'm talking about. It's such a vibe. That's what they did for the 2000s. And then for the 2010s, they did something else. But it like, I was with them until 1990. And then I was like, oh no, you've lost me entirely. This is not what we wore in the 90s. I'm old enough to remember and also young enough to remember at the same time. Like I remembered what this looked like, but they were off by 10 years. And I was like, I wonder if someone older maybe designed this and they just couldn't tell the difference. Like,
right.
Maybe not a Gen X, because Gen X would have nailed the 90s, but like maybe it was like a boomer or something who was like, oh yeah.
That was it.
Yeah, that was the look. And that was not the look. So anyway, I was like,
you can write a letter to Delta.
That's right. Like you need to change the fashion of this.
Now, was this like the safety videos too?
Yeah.
Like okay, so you know what's really interesting? What's funny? I read this article the other day that said airlines are trying to, and maybe this is probably nothing about Delta, and I know that was like 100-year. Airlines are trying to like liven up their safety videos, make them more fun. But then there's research that says that doing that doesn't help people retain the information.
So true.
And you're supposed to be able to retain how you're supposed to save yourself if something happens. So it was interesting. I think it's definitely a trend of maybe trying to improve or make more fun these videos.
So true. When I was so clocked into the fashion for each decade that I I remember, like, yeah, look for the exit signs. I've flown a lot though. So I'm like, I generally know, like, yes, like the flotation device is underneath your seat, which I never actually looked for it, by the way. Next time you should actually look at it. Like, it looks like what it looks like in the video, but I actually looked at it and I was like, oh, it's literally right there. I just never.
Right. It's just like the shape of the seat, right?
It's a little shorter. Like, it's not as wide as the seat, but it truly is like, there's your seat and it's like this thick, and then right underneath it's right there. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I just don't. In my mind, I thought it was like, I don't know, further away, maybe more obfuscated, but it's not at all. It's just literally just chilling right there. And then I know, like, yeah, like there are flotation devices and blah, 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 but totally. I would not retain half of what they said because I was so clued into what they were wearing and what the vibes were in each segment. But I will say the Delta uniforms they've always looked so good for each decade, and they've absolutely changed over the years. And it's just, I don't know, it's just really cool. And like the same thing for like, the pilots and like all the stewards. So no, it was really cool. It was just those like last 3 decades that I was like, this is so wrong. But anyway, I just wanted to share that because I don't know why I thought of this, but probably we're talking about planes or whatever. But anyway.
Well, that's apparently good marketing for Delta because.
Yeah. Okay. So there is one last thing that I will share. And it is, it's a deep cut for sure. Like, it's like, this information / advice is so niched in a way, but it is still also broadly applicable. And I mentioned at the beginning of the pod when we did our intro that it never fails. I will go to a conference and any conference, usually it's like a SaaS conference, but someone will come up to me and say, I love your podcast. When's the next season coming out? And then I'm always like, oh my God, I don't know. But that genuinely motivates me to do another season. Because in my mind, because now it's real that like, oh, there is a person on the other end waiting for this. So I just wanted to share. So we're at Indie Founders. And our schedule or agenda, for example, is like, day one, we'll go into sessions where it's like topic or themed, and you've got to pick one. Like, there's usually like 2 or 3 sessions that you could go to, and you got to pick one and commit. And then there's lunch, and then like there's more sessions, and then there are like founder groups that are just, you can bring any topic to the table, but you're in this group and it's curated. And the next day is the same thing, except at the beginning of the day, we'll open with like founder stories. And usually founder stories also happen on the first day. I think that they're just like right before lunch. And then more founder stories happen the second day as well. And on the first day, because I'm not expecting this at all, like I went to MicroConf, someone came up to me and was like, oh my God, I love your podcast. When's the next season coming out? And I was like, fuck, that means I got to do it. But then it happened again at Indie Founders. And there was a founder told their story for how they started and built and ran their company. And in the middle of their story, they were like, and they hit this wall in the company and they're trying to troubleshoot and figure out like what's wrong with it. And then because I listened to Asia's podcast, I've listened to every episode. Asia told me to talk to my customers. So I did. And I was like, no, my God. It is such a blessing and a curse. Like, I need people to understand though, how much of a curse this is for me, but it is a blessing. Like, that's amazing that the podcast ended up in his hands, but at the same exact time, it feels like such a curse because podcasts feel like one-way streets, but they're actually two-way streets. You just may never experience the other side of it.
And you were lucky to hear that feedback.
That's why it's a blessing, because it is like, actually, this is kind of cool. I shared a story because a lot of people probably are either thinking of a podcast or thinking of executing a podcast for their customer base. And I think, physical living proof that even if you never interface with your customer, at the end of the day, like maybe you never go to conferences where your customers are and like you get to hear that feedback. But what I will say is podcasts, while they are very tough to attribute, they absolutely hold a space in a marketing strategy. Yeah. For us, podcasts do make a lot of sense. But despite how logical it is for me, it ends up being very illogical when it comes to actual execution, because I just know myself well enough to know that like what motivates me is not necessarily the creative expression of some people look at podcasting as like, ooh, I get to make something, like Arvid Kahl, for example. And actually, I'd be really curious like what his actual perspective of this is. But, he runs the Bootstrapped Founder. He has his podcast. He also runs PodScan. Arvid gets excited about sharing things, so much so that he just does it. And that is so not me, because I really get excited about individuals and about people and about crowds, and they need to be like literally in front of me. That's what I get excited about. But all that to say, yeah, like podcasts are notoriously tough to attribute, to create attribution for, and yet they are such influencers for people. And it actually is a two-way street, because they get to know you a little bit, but they see how you think, obviously. And also it creates almost like a silent dialogue. Like there is a dialogue happening that you just don't get to hear. And I think that's kind of fascinating.
Yes, right. And the format lends itself very well to what you're not just going to write in a LinkedIn post, right, necessarily, or in a blog post. And yes, content from a podcast can then get redistributed in different ways. But the podcast format is interesting in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also, one of the things that we kind of joked about at Indie Founders was how many people wanted to start podcasts, how many people already had podcasts, but maybe like they were like me, like they weren't super active with them all the time. And then how many people did not have a podcast, weren't considering it at all. And the overlap of all of this was hilarious, because by the end of it, I think we all were kind of like, so everyone needs a podcast, basically. And it's like, well, who's listening to these? But then you talk to like hardcore podcast listeners, and they're like, I listen while I'm driving. I listen while I'm doing yard work. I listen while I'm, doing dishes, yada, yada, yada. And it just, like sometimes I forget, I say this as a marketer to illustrate how easy it is to forget this. But sometimes I forget that, like, there is a human experience that is completely different from mine. And that is part of the beauty of what we do, is there are listeners out there who find this extremely valuable and are like, can you do this more? And that is why I am here now with you, Kim.
Audience, you have asked, we have answered.
We are delivering, doing our best.
And that's what also how it came about when me and you were talking, where I'm like, I hear you saying all these things that these people were hearing on some podcast episodes. When me and you are talking, while we're doing client work, when we're on different various calls with different businesses. So it's all there.
Totally.
It's, just got to record some of it.
It's just locked away. And I think the other thing too is like, I can only speak on so many stages, so many times before there's like exhaust almost, where like the audience is like, there's Asia again. I jokingly say that because no one's ever told me that, but not that they ever would, you never know. But there's only so many times like you can get on the same stage every year before it's like, okay, people need to consume this in a different way. But yeah, totally. So all that to say, this is why we're here trying to figure this out, trying to do this more often. We have, funnily enough, I don't want to say that we don't have a plan, but we are trying to keep this as organic as possible. And so our goal is really to capture all of the things that happen in a week, all of the conversations that we have, the things that we're teaching, the things that we're unpacking and discovering together. And there are certainly there's a backlog of things that I could fill you in on from the last month or two. And I'm sure, Kim, you've got some topics that you're like, please talk about this, because we talk about it all the time and it's never anywhere in the open and public.
Right.
But all to say, this season, like I said, it's gonna feel a little bit different, but hopefully it's something that provides value to you and you can use in your founder journey and it not be so solo all the time. Because I will say, Indie Founders and MicroConf, it reminds me how critical it is as a founder to be with other founders. And so hopefully this is a little bit of, that parasocial connection a little bit. But in the meantime, our ears are totally open. I'm sure at some point we'll have a way for you to send in questions and we'll absolutely start testing things out there. But we'd love to hear from you. If there's anything that you'd like to hear us unpack or hear me talk about, would love to do that for you. But in the meantime, thanks again for joining and we'll see you on the next one. Bye, y'all.
See you, everyone.